All right, joining us now is one of my favorite guests, Eric Peters of ericpetersautos.com. Eric talks about two of my favorite topics, liberty and cars. And we're going to talk about both of those today. Thank you for joining us, Eric. It's always great to have you on.
Thank you, David. I hope we're not about to lose both of those things.
Yeah, I know. They're after them, aren't they? They got multiple ways.
It seems to be that way. It sure seems to be that's the goal, doesn't it?
Life in the crosshairs, yeah.
Yeah, you and I were talking a little bit off the air. I read this morning about what they call, it's a term I wasn't familiar with, the diesel crack, which I think is expressed as a ratio of the cost to distill diesel fuel out of petroleum, and how that is starting to really spike in terms of the price.
Oh, yeah.
And I gather that the cost of diesel has gone up 10 to 20 cents around the country in just the past 24 hours. This is a story that isn't being covered enough. And everybody's talking about the gas price thing, and that's important, obviously.
Right.
But the diesel thing is even more important because it affects everything.
Yeah, I look at it as a value-added tax. It's like a tax that's added at each stage of production and transportation. And I've got several truckers who listen to the program. They've been telling me they think it's going to go over $6 a gallon pretty soon.
Sure. And, winter's not that far away at this point. And people's home heating bills potentially are going to go parabolic.
Yeah.
And this is just what we need, right? On top of everything else.
Yeah.
Seeing your heating, home heating costs go up by 40% or 50% or even more than that. It just seems that the whole thing is starting to creak and is about to crack and tumble and fall over on account of this. I mean, I have difficulty even coming up with adjectives for it. This
Orange man.
Yeah. It would be funny, except it's so serious. This is incurring real harm on real people, like so many. And one of the galling things to me, and I think a lot of other people too, is his indifference to it. Is his not only indifference, his contempt for the concerns. The other day, he said something in New York. He was talking to some of his seal clapping followers and saying, "You're paying a little more, just a little bit more." We have to. I mean, it was an incoherent concatenation of gibberish. I don't have the actual quote in front of me, but it was just this sort of bungled up, like multi-syllabic, multi-sentence thing about how we shouldn't complain.
Yeah, this is coming from a guy who's enriched himself more in 1 year than he did in his previous 60 years of business. This
Absolutely.
guy is feeding at the trough like no politician we've ever seen before. And he has the audacity to tell us that we should just buck up and pay the extra money for the gasoline because it's not his fault, right?
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
And then I see people cheering him, saying, yeah, that's absolutely right. He's the only person who's had the guts to go after Iran for 50 years. And it's like, pal, you have absolutely no clue as to how our relationship with Iran began. 73 years ago, we overthrew their government. And we put in a Shah puppet. And it took them 25 years for that blowback to happen. And I'm not saying the Iranian people are any better off under the Shah, under the Ayatollah, but that's where it all began. It didn't just begin with the takeover of the embassy. That was a pushback against 25 years of suffering that was created by the U.S. government, by the CIA, and by Mossad.
Weren't these the same people who just a year ago were cheering Trump's promises that we weren't going to get involved in these wars that we're going to see our energy costs go down? And now somehow, it's like just literally out of Orwell's 1984. If the party commands it, you can just pull up that parking brake, do a 180 and go back on everything that was said and you love it. It's fascinating to consider, even though these effects are going to affect all of us. Another aspect of this that I think is very interesting is that people were rightly pointing out during the last year of Biden's presidency that he was clearly exhibiting signs of both physical and mental decline. Mm-hmm. And the Democrats were just obviously pretending that they didn't see it. Well, and now the Republicans are doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's right.
And from the point of view of the Democrats, they thought, oh gosh, this was a mistake. Look, if we had been smart about it, and if we had kind of figured out a way to get Biden out of there in time for us to have a decent primary and contest and bring out a candidate, we might have beaten Trump. Well, what's going to happen now? Probably, unless Trump declares himself Hefe for life, which he might. The backlash against this guy is going to be a tsunami.
Yeah, I talked about that. When you look at the left, they are championing Ossoff, Drudge especially. And Ossoff is very articulate. He's very smart. He had a great speech attacking Trump. However, and everything he said about Trump, I agreed with. However, that's the only thing I agree with him on. If you look at what the John Birch Society does with his voting record, he's got 5% out of 100%. He is about as hard left as you're going to find anywhere. And yet Trump is paving the way for him because of Trump's statism and because of his open corruption. He's going to push us into a socialist government. I believe that's what he's there for.
Yes, I do too, actually. I absolutely agree. The reason we go back 15, 20 years, we had George W. Bush, and what was the result of him? We got Obama. Mm-hmm. And now this cycle keeps perpetuating. And each time the authoritarianism and the collectivism and the tyranny increases just a little bit.
That's right.
It never gets better. And each 4 years we're presented with, oh, he's our savior. This is the guy who's going to bring us hope and change, Obama. Or, he's going to make America great again, Trump. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that people are beginning to notice a pattern, and that this stuff, it's all kabuki. It's very lethal kabuki. It's WWE wrestling. They bring out these characters, for you to cheer at. But in the end, the whole thing is rigged, and it's rigged against us. And it's really important that people understand that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, there was a great article I covered. The guy was talking about statism paving the way for socialism. And as I said, I can't think of a more statist president ever than Donald Trump. And yet the people who would self-identify as conservatives are applauding him. They think that the only way to fix anything is to have the right president. And Trump is the right president. And so we got to have Trump there. He's going to fix everything for us. That kind of passivity, which reminds me of your article, The New Charlie. Talk about that. I really liked your take on that.
Yeah, really interesting. There's a lot of talk about who's going to be the next leader of the MAGA movement, who's going to be the next nationalist populist leader. Mm-hmm. And some people thought, well, Charlie might have been, because he was having this awakening. Yeah. Of course, Charlie's not with us any longer. And I think the lesson to take from that, though, is to not put your reliance necessarily in a leader, but to be self-led, to mm-hmm. not look for followers. I think the most important thing that Charlie Kirk did was to sort of pull back the curtain to a degree that most people haven't seen before. I think everybody understands that wasn't just a random event. Mm-hmm. The way it was handled in the aftermath, I don't obviously know what the particulars are, but the fact that they purposefully destroyed that crime scene within 24 hours afterward.
Everything about it points to yes. criminal purposes here about the people who are not being identified as criminals.
Yeah, Charlie straight from the plantation. He was useful for a time, and all of a sudden he began, sort of like in the Truman Show, Jim Carrey, he began mm-hmm. to see. Yeah. And he began, even worse, to speak. And he was enormously influential with young people, college-age people. And that was a problem for puppeteers behind the scenes. And so he had to go. And I think it's very interesting that since he's been gone, his organization has fallen flat on its face. Everybody sees through it. Nobody wants anything to do with Erica Kirk. Nobody wants anything to do with TPUSA. These are all
everybody sees that it's absolutely controlled by Israel. And yes. and that's why people are believing that Israel was behind the assassination. Cui bono, right?
Sure, certainly, exactly. Who else benefited from it? How else could that have happened? Yeah. Why was it handled the way that it was handled? These are all legitimate questions. I know some are going to say anti-Semitism. That's not selling anymore either, and I'm happy about that.
I know. I was just talking about that today. That we're recording this on Tuesday, and I was talking about that Tuesday morning. The fact that you look at these tactics that they're doing. We've got a couple of different tactics that have come out from the Trump administration, which is, of course, owned by the Zionists. And we see these same tactics that we've seen in universities, that we've seen to shut people down. If you disagree with them, of course, the first thing is to say racist, racist. But now we've also got the other tactic that we also have seen with that. If you were to talk about transgenderism and you didn't want to indulge in their fantasy, then you were somebody that was guilty of hate speech, and your speech could cause violence. Therefore, your speech is violence. And we're seeing that same game played as well, which tells us, where did these two things come from? Anyway, it came from the Zionist crowd to start with, didn't it?
Yeah, and they're helping us along, bless them. You probably caught the comment made by Ben-Gvir the other day about how the Israelis should slaughter 20 to 30 Gazans every day. He literally used a term that people who are students of World War II will be familiar with, which was life unworthy of life.
That's right.
The
they
Nazis
have literally become the Nazis. There's no question about it.
Nazis.
Yeah.
For those who aren't aware, during that period, people who were, for example, afflicted in mental problems and so on, were executed. That was where the whole thing began in these hospitals. They took people who had Down syndrome or problems like that, and they executed them. They killed them because they figured that their lives had no value, life unworthy of life. And that's the attitude of this Ben-Gvir guy. And I don't doubt for a moment that it's an attitude shared by Netanyahu and a lot of other people in the Israeli hierarchy. These are psychopathic, genocidal people.
He is very, very popular. He's actually more popular in many people than Netanyahu is, because he's pushing this harder than Netanyahu is. I said, for the longest time, you could look at this and say, well, all right, well, that's just one politician there. That doesn't necessarily affect everybody in Israel, except that the people in Israel are pushing for a harder approach than even Netanyahu. They like the Ben-Gvirs.
Yeah, that story's not being covered actually very well. Netanyahu is considered a relative moderate in Israel. And a lot of the people want somebody even more of a hardliner than he is. It's appalling. And so but it's good because it's indefensible. There's no nuance here any longer. What's going on over there is so criminally outrageous that no reasonable person can look at it and say, yeah, that's all right. It's okay to raise, an entire area and kill 70, 80,000 people, women and children, old people, displace whole populations. Yeah, that's acceptable. It's not working anymore. They're burying themselves, these people. They're confirming and Kirk talked about this. They're confirming every single stereotype, that has been leveled against them over the years. And again, I'm not saying that they're all like that, but the leadership is absolutely.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's time to call it out.
Their approach is that rather than trying to defend it, they'll just silence you. They'll ban you. They will make you a non-person in the same way that Ben-Gvir, when he said, life not worthy of life, he says, they're not even human, right? They're less than human. And that was also a part of the allegations against them. Again, they have become exactly what they fought. And many times we've heard the old expression, you be careful that you don't become the monster that you fight. They have become that monster in spades.
It's really amazing. They even use the same terminology. The National Socialists referred to the Greater German Reich. And Lebensraum, expanding the borders of the Reich.
That's right.
Well, Greater Israel, and this land grabbing and this business of pushing them, pushing other people out of their land so that they can have the land. It's astounding. It's as they say, it's about history, recurring and rhyming. I've never seen anything quite like it.
Yeah, and when you look at what the Israeli settlers are doing, so-called settlers, they're terrorists and thieves, throwing everybody out, and they're equal opportunity. It's not just one group of people that they don't like. People are starting to see now in Lebanon and in places in Gaza that they are removing all the Christians. They waited for a while for them. Now they're coming after the Christians. They're coming after everybody because they have been taught that they are the master race, that everybody else is subhuman.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a key issue. It is, I liked your take, though, that what we need are a million Charlies. We need people to stand up on their own. I think we're starting to see that a bit with the flock cameras. And there was an interesting article that was with Wired Magazine. It was a guy who stood up against it as a cop in Rhode Island. Of course, they purged him out, just like they purge out the cops who don't enforce the mask regulations and stuff like that in 2020. So anybody who's good gets purged out. It reminds me of what Frank Serpico said. He said, every human institution is going to have good and bad people in it because that's just the way the human population is. But because the test of an institution is whether or not it will remove the bad people, or if it closes around them and protects them, then it is corrupted. It becomes bad and evil. And that's what we're starting to see with these things.
Well, I think the corruption has gotten to be so blatant that it can't be hidden any longer. Everybody understands that this specious talk about keeping us safe is really it's about controlling us, and secondarily, it's about mulcting us. Mm-hmm. That's what Flock is all about. They're not doing this out of a sort of motherly benevolence, like a mom watching her kid, keeping a watchful eye on her kid in the park to make sure nothing happens. That's benevolent. Mm-hmm. Garrett Langley, the head of Flock, is not benevolent. He's doing this because they know that if they put these cameras up everywhere, they can extract more money from us from a variety of different methods, from parking infractions, traffic infractions, to everything else you can conceivably imagine, and control us.
And we've already seen an example of that. It was an elected official. I forget who it was or what level they were. I think it's somebody in Congress. And he said he was driving his car and they go home and all of a sudden there's a policeman knocking at the door. And embarrassed them because what are the police here for? And the cop had they'd noticed in Flock that he was driving a car that had an expired registration on it. So then they make a personal call to his house. That's an example of how this is going to be used. It's not going to be used to stop crime. What a joke that is. It's absolutely ridiculous. As a matter of fact, when you look at the number of people who've been arrested for cutting down these Flock cameras, it's in the low 30s. When you look at the number of cops who have been arrested for abuse of Flock or who have been kicked out of their job, it's in the high 50s. It's nearly 2-to-1. Cop corruption versus crime.
There's an aspect of this that's very interesting to me too, in that, okay, so this guy, he gets paid a visit by the cop over an expired sticker.
Yeah.
Juxtapose that with Fauci, for example.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, you've got this guy who's responsible for almost immeasurable damage done to the country, to our psyche, to our economy. It's literally incalculable the degree of damage that man did. He walks, nothing happens. He can smirk and insolently go before Congress, plead the fifth, walk out of there. Nothing's going to happen to him. But this guy's got an outdated sticker on his car, and a cop shows up, and no wonder people are furious.
Well, take a look at Trump. I mean, Trump was his boss, and Trump gave him a medal on his last day in office, and talked about what a smart guy he was. And then look at Trump and his corrupt attorney general and what they're not doing about the Epstein criminals out there, pretending that there's nothing at all out there. Todd Blanche, even before he was confirmed, and this came up as part of the confirmation, but they confirmed him anyway. And he said, he didn't want to meet with victims. Finally, when he meets with the victims, they all said, he made it pretty obvious that he didn't want to be there. He wanted to get out of there. He said, so exactly what is your point? He's like, what is your point? That's going to be your takeaway? It's absurd.
So wasn't Blanche also Trump's consigliere in that matter of giving him immunity from IRS prosecution, and not just Trump, but his entire family?
Yeah, and setting up the nearly $2 billion slush fund. Yeah, that was all Todd Blanche as well.
Yeah, I mean, we laugh, but it's really serious. It smacks of pre-revolutionary Russia. Where finally it exploded. People have a limit. At some point, it's going to be enough. And I think what we're seeing with the citizen action with regard to Flock cameras, I foresee that is going to increase.
I think so too. The only thing I'm worried about is I see it being hijacked by the environmental crazies and people on the left. This is the ideal issue to cross party lines, and the Republicans are running as far away from it as they can. I mean, we saw the Wall Street Journal headline saying, the summer of Luddites, saying if you oppose surveillance centers and you oppose the Flock eyes for the surveillance centers, then you're somehow a Luddite. I'm sorry, that's technology abused. That is not anything we should ever be cheering.
Don't these people have, I think, can they be that stupid?
They got dollar signs in their eyes.
Let's go back to, the January 6th insurrection. In fact, all those people who went there, most of them just went there because they wanted to, just express their dissatisfaction. They weren't violent, the vast majority of them. But, what happened to some of those people who just happened to be there, didn't do anything other than that they were physically present? Now, imagine a scenario where these flock cameras are involved and they know every single person who potentially goes to any demonstration of any kind. What about if we ever have another lockdown and they can tell immediately whether you have left your house, whether your vehicle was on the road, whether you went shopping when you weren't allowed to.
That's right.
That's what this is ultimately all about. And I just don't understand how anybody, not actually a moron, in the definitional sense, who has an IQ under 80, can't see this.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Yeah, I mean, I went to the mat over that January the 6th stuff. I told everybody it was a grift when Alex was running the grift. And so he fired me. And I told people on January the 6th, I said, please don't go. It is a trap. They're going to set you up, and they're going to set up all conservatives. And that's exactly what they did do. And they did it with all kinds of geospatial location. They set up a geofence around there. Anybody that's in that area, you become a suspect. And we've had a lot of people falsely arrested over the flock cameras over that. Now, the left will not attribute that to the people on J6. No, everybody that's a J6, they're a criminal. They belong in jail. That should really energize the conservatives against it. And yet here in Tennessee, we just had primaries for Democrats and Republicans. We had 3 Republican candidates. I interviewed one guy. He was very good. He was with us on Liberty, very much so, Monty Fritz. But the other 2 was a congressman and then Marsha Blackburn, the senator. They are 100% behind flock. They're telling us, oh, this is going to make us all rich. It's going to make us all safe. We got to jump into this thing with both feet. Of course, Marsha Blackburn has pushed every form of digital ID, mark of the beast control, and unapologetically for Trump. And so she was out there. She actually had, Eric, you would get a kick out of this. I played it, and it's hysterical. Every time I see it, I can't believe how stupid it is. She's sitting in a Chinese restaurant, crumbling up fortune cookies, saying, these people in China, we can't let them get ahead of us. And she's going to crumble their cookies. And it's the most juvenile, inane, stupid thing I've ever seen in my life. And I guess it's where she is. It's who she is, I guess. The only thing I've ever seen from Marsha Blackburn was when she asked that question of Ketanji Brown Jackson in the Supreme Court hearing, confirmation hearings, said, what is a woman, right? So she's, she can put her on the hot seat, but I kind of wonder if Marsha even knows, because this is, she's unbelievably naive and stupid.
Yeah, I wonder whether Marsha Blackburn and any of these other people would like to have a camera in their bedroom, in their bathroom, a live feed, so we can see what they're up to. What are they doing? They might be doing something wrong in there. It's very important that we make sure that they're not doing something wrong. And if they are, that we can do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure that Marsha's never read Orwell.
Or they don't think it's going to happen to them. They maybe think that they're immunized from it. I'm sure that Garrett Langley, the CEO of Flock, probably has a very big house someplace that's gated and secure, and people can't see what's going on. I wonder how he'd like it if some drones were to fly over his house with cameras.
Well, he wouldn't like that. As a matter of fact, somebody started following him around Atlanta, and they noticed that he uses 3 different license plates. He's constantly changing his license plates.
This is horrific. And I unfortunately, I think, you and I can remember the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, and we can remember the Stasi and the way people had to live in those kinds of countries. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are not old enough to remember that any longer, and who can actually be swayed by the idea that this technology is benevolent. You got nothing to hide. I mean, it's so personally insulting too. Imagine you get pulled over in your car and you didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And this cop wants to rummage through your stuff. Yeah. Wants to look in your. I mean, it doesn't matter that you have nothing to hide. It's an invasion of the sanctity of your privacy and your personal space. And you shouldn't have to put up with this sort of a thing in a free society. Just as you shouldn't have to be worried about somebody recording you, monitoring you when you happen to be outside in public. At least not the government. It's one thing if somebody's out there, with a whatever camcorder, and they're filming their kid, and you happen to be in the frame. They can't monetize that. They can't use that against you. Mm-hmm. But these corporations, in tandem with the government, this is deliberately meant to be used against you. They say, we're just trying to make sure if somebody happens to perform an armed robbery, we'll be able to find out who it is. Well, they're finding out everything about everyone. Just like in your example, they happen to see this guy's got an out-of-date sticker on his car.
Yeah, yeah. And, it's the old talk about Stasi, and of course it's the Stalinist thing, bring me the man, I'll find the crime, right?
Sure.
And that's the way I feel about it whenever I get pulled over or I got a cop that's writing my bumper. I know that he's doing an audit, a roadside audit of me, and maybe he's going to pull me over for more of an audit. And I really, the question is, if you see a cop in your rearview mirror up close behind you, do you feel safer? Come on, be honest, people. Do you really feel safer? Or do you realize that they are looking for some way to steal money from you or to find some other offense? Because as Harry Silverglate said, 3 felonies a day, he said, the law has become so complex that on average, the average American commits 3 felonies a day. Well, guess what? With Flock, with the data centers and all the rest of the stuff, they'll be able to find those 3 felonies. Just take a look at what Pulte did for Trump against some of his enemies. He went back and audited all their real estate transactions for their entire life. And he found a couple that were questionable, probably fraudulent. Nevertheless, I found that to be very chilling. And I didn't see anybody really talking about the implications of what artificial intelligence can do in terms of auditing people's lives.
Yep. You bring up a very important point, I think, which is that the Flock stuff is all premised on the idea that the laws are only going to go after the bad people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And, so in that context, why is it that people like you and I and all the people listening to us probably aren't criminals in the sense that we're not killing, we're not raping, we're not beating, we're not stealing, we're not doing anything to anybody. Now, granted, I may have made an illegal right on red. I may not be bottled up for safety, but that's the point. The fact that ordinary people like us kind of get nervous when we see a cop, that says something. We shouldn't be.
That's
the only
right.
people who feel nervous around cops are actual criminals. Yeah. And yet we all feel nervous. Nobody feels safe when a cop is on their bumper.
That's right. Yeah, there's a very excellent article on Wired Magazine about a cop in Rhode Island who took on the Flock system and he got fired for it because he looked at it and he said, first the company came and gave a presentation to the police officers. And he said, they're all looking at this and how they could use it. And he goes, but I thought, well, how are they going to be? They're going to be searching everybody with this stuff. And so he really wasn't very happy with it. But then he thought the thing died because they didn't have the money. Little did he know that they're not going to fix the potholes in the road. They're going to add Flock cameras everywhere. And so all of a sudden these things start showing up and he looks at them closely and he realizes they got a whole bunch of them. And then they said, oh, that's okay. This is just a free trial from Flock. We haven't bought them yet. Next thing you know, 4 months later, they go in for hundreds of thousands of dollars in this small, tiny town to put in all these different Flock cameras. At that point, he called a city councilman and said, when did we have this meeting about getting public approval for this and letting the public know this is going to be done? He said, we didn't have a meeting. And so then he went to the local paper. And then the police came after him because they said, you're making the department look bad and telling people what we're doing. You should not tell the public the methods that the police are using. And he said, well, I got a problem with that. So they really came after him. Basically, he didn't get shot in the face like Frank Serpico, but it's the same type of thing. They do come after you if you push against the system.
The problem here is that even in our current time, there's just too many people who are getting away with things, like having an out-of-date sticker on their car, like not wearing a seatbelt, like perhaps using their phone while they're driving. Never mind that the car has a phone built into the dash. That's a whole other topic. But there are only so many violations that an individual cop can issue tickets for in a day. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it's possible for us to sort of evade and dance around and get away with things. These are all these petty malum prohibitum types of offenses, meaning, they're considered bad because they're illegal, but it's not a moral issue. Mm-hmm. Beat somebody up and you take their money, that's a moral issue. Mm-hmm. You don't need a law to tell you that that's wrong. It just is wrong, right?
That's right.
The point is that they can just basically, like, it's what do you call it, dragnet fishing that they use, instead of having lines, and they just sweep the ocean floor and they pick up absolutely everything.
Yeah.
That's what they want to do. And you can imagine how stifling it will be if you knew that we live in a system where you can't get away with anything anymore. Like whatever the edict is, no matter how petty, insufferable, and tyrannical it is, you pretty much better do what they say. If not, you're going to be punished. You have that knowledge in your head. Think about the kind of society that will be.
Oh, yeah. It's a psychological issue as well. And I've talked about this on the show. When you look at B.F. Skinner, the psychologist, he wrote a book, Beyond Freedom and Dignity. We want to treat us all like animals, and say that we don't have freedom and dignity, that we're somehow less than human. And this is for everybody. This is not just for the goy, right? This is for everybody. And it is a very intimidating situation. But of course, it was the way I came across that text was because it was required reading for Karen when she was getting her master's degree in education. They want you to think like that in education. They want you to think about how you can control other people because it is government education.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Bringing up the government school thing, I think I talked about that a little bit in my article about Charlie Kirk. The whole point of that is to stifle people's ability to think.
Mm-hmm.
They want you to rote regurgitate. That's what they want. And when you've got that, then you get this sort of ideological personality that receives the talking points.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a weird time. It's kind of like ordinary religion has been displaced by this fervent secular religion, this statist religion.
And it is idolatry. It absolutely is.
Yeah, and it mirrors religion, except in a really perverse way. It's like you have these codas and dogmas that have to be adhered to, and there's no flexibility. It's like every parody of the medieval church, let's say, applied to the state. You have to adhere mindlessly to whatever the program is, and anybody who doesn't is an apostate and is somebody who not merely disagrees, but this person is evil and must be effectively burned at the stake. This is the kind of society that we have, and we have two churches now, left and right, at war with each other.
Two denominations.
Yeah. And I guess us heretics, the ones who are actually capable of seeing it and thinking about it. And it's not necessarily a function of high IQ. It's just simply the ability to reason and to see it and to not be drawn into this ideological nonsense that they're trying to get us to fixate on.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. When we look at it, I've often referred to them as Godverment. And they aspire to all the omnis that we typically attribute to God as being the characteristics of God. Omniscient, they know everything they're doing. Omnipresent, they are everywhere, and they are omnipotent. They have all power. That is what all these governments want. And our government is no different. It does not adhere to the principles of the Declaration of Independence. No, it wants to declare that you are a dependent of it. And that is exactly how they operate. And along those lines, you talk about this in your article, In Defense of Luigi.
Yeah.
I thought that was spot on. Give people your take on Luigi Mangione, I think is the way he pronounces it. I would pronounce it as Mangione, but I think he pronounces it as Mangione.
Well, I'm going to go back in time a little bit to New York City in the early 80s. I think it was the early 80s when there was an incident involving John Gotti, who some will remember, who took out the head of I think it was the Colombo crime family, a guy named Big Paul Castellano, outside of Sparks Steakhouse. Now, the point that I'm trying to make here is that, sure, John Gotti was a thug and a cretin, and maybe this Luigi guy is a bad guy too. But it's hard to rouse much sympathy for Big Paul Castellano, and I don't have a lot of sympathy for these mafia CEO insurance people either.
I agree.
Because after all, these companies are not merely offering a product that people are free to buy or not.
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
They are leveraging the state to mulct us, to harass us. I continue to get threat letters from the IRS because I didn't have my shared responsibility payment, for buying Obamacare. Remember when the individual mandate?
Yeah, that's right.
To the tune of $1,000. They say I owe them because of my shared responsibility because I didn't buy health insurance one of those years.
Well, I look at that and you talk about that, and it's you refer to Luca Brasi, as
Yes.
Michael Corleone talks about how he got Luca Brasi to get this guy to sign the paper. He said, "You're either going to sign the paper or your brains are going to be on that paper." Yep. And you point out that Luca Brasi would never have thought of himself as an agent of public safety, that he was doing things for the guy's own good. He knew what he was. And yet we see exactly the opposite happening today within government.
Yeah. This all started, I think, with the car insurance stuff, when they succeeded in making it a requirement and using the state to enforce. So now the state is acting as the Luca Brasi for these private for-profit enterprises. And the health insurance mafia saw that and said, it is good. We need to get in on that action. And so they did. That's what Obamacare was all about.
And we're not very far from that being done with vaccines either.
Sure.
They've got the government to cover them and say that they can do no wrong, that no matter what harm they do to your children, they're protected. And think about that. Fauci got the immunity vaccine law passed to immunize them against any legal culpability for harming kids when they vaccinated the kids. That's just to me, they targeted the kids.
Everybody they've targeted. So on the one hand, they extract obscene amounts of money from us. Bad enough. But then, the whole predicate of this insurance stuff is, you're covered, whether it's car or health. But you know what happens? When you actually file a claim, they fight tooth and nail and use every tactic in their dirty book to see to it that they don't pay anything.
That's right.
And that's apparently what prompted Luigi to do what he did. And I think it resonates because a lot of people are furious about it. They pay all this money pay in sometimes for decades, and then something happens and, they want to be covered for what they thought they had insurance for. And they find, you're not covered. There's some technical issue. You didn't do this. You didn't get pre-approved, whatever it is. It's outrageous. Yeah. These people are gangsters. The only difference between that gang and the Don Corleone gang is that this gang is legalized, which makes it even worse. Hypothetically, if Luca Brasi shows up in your shop, you can actually defend yourself and the law will back you up. But when it comes to the insurance mafia, you can't defend yourself against these people. And that makes it doubly awful.
That's right. And from the very beginning, this whole thing was the health issue, certainly, was corrupt. I mean, look at John Roberts. This is a guy who, first of all, wrote the opinion that said, it's a tax, so we can do that. Prior to that, he said, no, the government doesn't have any power to tell you that you got to buy health insurance. So he wrote both opinions. And what happened? He wrote the other opinion saying they can go ahead and do it and we'll call it a tax. He wrote that opinion just before it was released. And I have believed all of this time that he was blackmailed. I don't know if it was an Epstein thing or what it was, but I have believed that he was blackmailed throughout all this stuff to write both opinions.
I agree with you. It's the only thing that makes sense. Yeah. He's not a stupid man. Yeah. And for him to issue both those contradictory opinions, clearly there's something wrong with this picture. Something happened that caused him to change his point of view. Yep. And to circle back to what I particularly find the most enraging about all of this is that this is for profit. These are private companies, ostensibly. They're in the business to make money. So we get to sit there while we watch TV and see these, endless ads for their insurance. Ooh, the emu, the Geico gecko. And have you ever been to one of the headquarters of these companies? It looks. I mean, you got marble floors and nothing but the finest. And see what these guys are paid. These are multi-millionaires. They're getting paid. Right. They're doing it on the backs of ordinary people who can barely pay their rent and their food bill. And they're pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And there is going to be a backlash to this, I'm convinced.
And I remember when this happened, when Luigi shot him, and there was a chart that I saw, and it had United Healthcare, by far and away the most profitable of all the health insurance companies, and by far and away the one most likely to deny your claim. They were several times more likely to deny your claim than the number two. So it truly is a situation where they force you to pay them, and then they never pay up even when you need it.
Yeah, it's unconscionable. So, again, I'm not endorsing murder, but I'm making a point that sometimes the people who end up on the wrong end of that aren't particularly sympathetic characters.
That's right. And it always reminds me, too, when we talk about the government safety officers, I'm always reminded of Lysander Spooner's analogy. He said, what's the difference between the government and a highway robber? He goes, well, a highway robber will steal your purse and leave you alone. The government will steal your purse and follow you down the road nagging you about everything. And he said this before we had cars.
He's so right about that. In Mexico, I have family in Mexico, so I have a little bit of experience with this. The corruption there is more honest.
Mm-hmm.
You might get, pulled over by a Mexican cop, and it's understood. You give the guy a couple of bills.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. He leaves you alone. There's none of this nonsense of handing you some stupid piece of paper, and then later on you're going to have to go to court, or you're going to have to deal with some insurance mobster. You just give the guy the equivalent of $20. He goes on his way. You go on yours. I mean, it's still a robbery, but at least it's an honest one. And I'd far rather, be the victim of an honest robber than these horrendous people who not only rob you but claim that they're keeping you safe and they're doing it for your own good.
I know, exactly. We had a similar situation like that when I was in high school. I was with a group of students, and we were on a European tour, and I forget what country it was, but these guys with machine guns step out and they stop the bus, and they come on with machine guns, and they literally force the bus driver to give them a bunch of money, and saying it was a fine or whatever. But they just collected it right at that point and then left him alone, right? They were just good highway robbers. So we all took up a collection and gave the guy the money back. But it was, that's exactly, I'd never seen anything like that before, but that is exactly what we're talking about here. It really is just highway robbery, except they compound it and make it much worse. And as you point out, that's the same thing that happens if you don't have your insurance. They compound it by impounding your car, stealing your car.
Yeah, then they steal your car, and then they'll steal more money from you in order for you to get your car back out. It keeps synergizing and getting worse and worse all the time. Mm-hmm. And every opportunity that we used to have to just sort of sidestep it a little bit and avoid the worst of it is being taken away from us. Getting back to all this flock stuff and this AI stuff, they want to know every last little thing, and they'll be able to catch us, in every one of our little transgressions, and that will be hell on earth at that point. You'll have no latitude. It will be complete compliance or total punishment.
I agree. Yeah. You had an article that I thought was a clever title. It never occurred to me until really just this last week when I thought about the fact that Lincoln is a brand of Ford, and Lincoln was shot in Ford Theater. I thought, well, was that a sick joke or what? But I think it just kind of happened that way with the merger of these companies. But you got an article, Trump kills a Lincoln. Talk about that.
And it has to do with tariffs. Ford announced the other day that it's going to stop making one of its models, the Nautilus, the Lincoln Nautilus, at its plant in China, which it then has been exporting to this country. Well, why does Lincoln do that? Could it be because it costs less to manufacture things in China than it does here?
Mm-hmm.
The Trumpster has imposed tariffs, which are taught to believe that it's not a tax because they call it something else. They call it a tariff, not understanding that you're going to pay more for vehicles by doing this. And the argument that Trump puts out and that people who back this put out is, well, we're going to have more jobs here in America. How's that actually going to happen when the manufacturing costs are higher here?
Yeah.
All you're going to succeed in doing is raising the level of everything, at least when you had somewhat less expensive alternatives that were coming from China or Korea. A lot of Hyundais and Kias are made in Korea, and competitively they were at an advantage because they could bring them over here and sell them for less than, say, a Ford or a Chevy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a good thing from the standpoint of view if you're a car buyer, because it kind of imposes some pressure on the domestic manufacturers to keep their costs down. But the big elephant in the room is Trump is doing nothing whatsoever about regulatory compliance costs, which is why nobody wants to do anything in this country. And until you fix that, all this is going to do is, again, raise the cost of everything, which seems to be Trump's forte.
Yeah. It's the regulations that's raising the cost of things, the regulations that make us non-competitive. And one of those regulations are the types of regulations that give the Chinese an advantage on energy. If they can get energy at a fraction of the cost, that's one of the major costs of any manufacturing is going to be energy. And so if you're not going to do anything to make our infrastructure more affordable and work better and to take off some of the regulatory burden that's there, all you're doing is adding a tax to people. And of course, how does he sell it, Eric? He tells people, typical Democrat line, because he's a New York City Democrat. He tells people somebody else is going to pay the tax. And they're bad people, and they should be paying your taxes for you.
Yeah, well, if you've gone shopping for anything lately, how's that working out for you? It's just Again, sometimes I lack for the words to express myself on this. And at the same time, Trump has not done anything about his promise to bring us tiny cars. We're going to have tiny cars. Remember that? And it's like Doge, $5,000 rebate checks. These promises, they get issued and then they just conveniently disappear.
That's right.
That would be a way to reduce some costs in this country. Bring in these expensive little cars that people would have an opportunity to buy. Just give them the option. Nobody's saying you have to buy a little car. If you think it's unsafe and you don't want to drive a car that's little like that without the airbags, well, nobody's making you do it. But boy, would it be a strong inducement for the manufacturers to start to reduce the price of their other models too.
That's right. Yeah. Well, of course, these tariffs from the very beginning were beyond idiotic. And Elon Musk even said Peter Navarro is dumber than a sack of bricks. I think that's an insult to the intelligence of a sack of bricks, frankly. When you go out, he didn't even do what typically people will do with a tariff. Usually they've got some industry that they want to protect. They didn't do that. Instead, this was Trump's personal ego project. And I'm going to attack this country over here because I don't like what the leader said about me yesterday. It is simply about egonomics. There's no economics in it at all. And none of it made any sense, even to the extent that he started ramping up tariffs on people that we had a trade surplus with. But when you just see things in terms of tribal aspects, and of course, that is Trump's forte. He is the most tribal of all the tribal politicians. And so this is our American tribe, and we don't want anything from any of the other tribes, and we're going to punish you if you try to get something from the other tribe.
It's astonishing that a billionaire real estate grifter from New York can somehow connect with, blue collar people in the hollers of Tennessee and Kentucky, for whom he has nothing but contempt, by the way, is I'm sure you'll agree with me.
Oh, yeah.
He would never have anything to do with those people outside of a political rally. Now, on the Chinese thing, the Chinese were smart enough while our elites were deconstructing our capacity to produce energy to keep up with demand. They have been building out their electrical grid. One of the covered stories about this whole business with the war is that the oil shortages haven't affected the Chinese very much because they have an extensive electrical grid. They actually imported some of our, decommissioned coal-fired, coal-burning generating equipment and brought it over there and built it up there.
That's right.
So
because Trump and Biden and Obama all joined in with the 2015 climate accord, right? The Paris Climate Accord. And said, China can build as many and as dirty power plants as they want, but you are going to have to cap yours and start reducing them. And that's exactly what they did. As you point out, they bought our used stuff and started repurposing it. It is absolutely insane. And of course, Trump went along with that, pretending that he was bound by that treaty that John Kerry and Obama said we just self-ratified it. We didn't have to go before the Senate. We just do it ourselves. And it's like, well, if you did it yourself, then it's not binding. And he could walk out of it, but he stayed in it his entire 4 years.
An aspect of this is particularly fascinating, Mr. Spock voice, is that, I don't hear much anymore about climate change now that these data centers are proliferating all over the country. All of a sudden, it's just fine that we've got these, massive energy hogs that are sucking dry the electrical grid and emitting lots of CO2. You don't hear much about the climate change anymore, do you?
Yeah. Well, you have some people who are diehard believers in that cult. And they've started complaining about that because these things are massive. The Amazon data center is going to be the biggest polluter in the United States by their standards. And I don't think that's just CO2 that is coming out. I don't consider that to be a pollutant. But it might be some other pollutants that are out there. But the grassroots are concerned about it. But the people at the top who are freaking out about this and telling us that we had to do without cars and all that other kind of stuff, they're completely silent about this. They don't care at all because the climate MacGuffin was going to take us to this society where we had to have government permission and privileges in order to do anything. They were going to use that as a means to track us and to control us. Then they're going to use COVID as a means to do that. Now they're just going to go directly to the data centers and forget about the excuses that we had before.
Yeah, deindustrialization, and also it's an attack on mobility. Again, as energy prices continue to ramp up, driving becomes less and less affordable. And they're going to succeed, I suppose, in herding a lot of people into these 15-minute freedom cities. Because after all, if it gets to the point where it costs you $150 to fill up your 4-cylinder crossover, commuting into town becomes unviable for most people.
That's right. And of course, also, I think there's a method to the madness of putting all of these massive solar farms and wind farms and now data centers out in the rural areas. I think they're trying to make the rural areas unlivable and unsustainable. And I think there's an aspect of that as well. What do you think about that?
I concur. That's an interesting thing that you brought up. Yeah, because people like peace and quiet. Now, I have not personally been near one of these things, but I gather that they emit a lot of unpleasant noise. Like if you're anywhere near them, there's sort of an electrostatic humming sound coming from them.
Yeah, I found a clip of somebody, and in the news article, they had audio of what it sounded like to be there. Now, these people have lived in this house for generations. It's out in a rural area, small house, and they said, we can't even be outside anymore. It's so loud, and you can even hear it inside when it's going off. And it's 24/7, never stops. And it was this really loud roar, like a piece of power equipment, because it's gas turbines that they're running.
Yeah. That's the last thing that you want. In fact, that's what most people who move to the country want to get away from is the sound of urbanity, the sound of cars and things and machinery. You want to be able to keep your windows open. Most people who live in the city or in the suburbs, they keep their windows closed and the air conditioning on, not just for temperature control, but just to drown out the noise that's outside of the house.
That's right.
One of the wonderful, nice amenities, I live out in the country, is keeping your windows open, so that you can hear the sounds of the outside world, not the artificial world, the real world, so the sounds of trees rustling and, animals and things like that. You take that away and you've taken away one of the major draws of living in the country.
That's right. Yeah, the silence and only hearing the birds that are out there, that type of thing. I agree. You've got an article that's dear to my heart. You had a picture of Miata, and you're talking about Miata. Give us your take on what's happening with Miata.
Well, I use the Miata, and I often go back to the Miata because I think it's sort of an archetype of the fun car. It's been in production since 1989, right? I think so, a long time, and it's been successful not because it has 1,000 horsepower, like these EVs, that have all this horsepower and that can bully their way to 60 in 2.8 seconds. The Mazda's Miata is not a particularly quick car, but boy, is it a lot of fun.
Yeah,
it's just an engaged car. And I think that's an important lesson. If you go back 30, 40 years when cars were still fun, most of them were not particularly powerful. I have, as you know, I've got a 70s Trans Am, and when it was new, it had all of 200 horsepower. By today's standards, it's pathetic. That a RAV4 has that much power, but it was fun. Yeah. Everything about it was fun. It had personality, and people talk of the cars from that era. Like Volkswagen Beetle is another really good example. Very slow car, to 0 to 60 in 25 seconds. But everybody who had one, when you ask them about it, they smile and they tell you the stories about it and how it had personality. You don't hear that anymore.
That's right. I had that experience with the Spitfire that I had. Yeah, the Triumph Spitfire I had was like that as well. Yeah. Incredibly slow car, but it was a lot of fun. The car that I had before was a 68 Mustang with a 289 V8 in it. And it was a lot faster than that that Spitfire. As a matter of fact, they even did a TV commercial for the Spitfire at that point in time, and they show this guy and his girlfriend. They're tootling along the road with the top down, and cars are passing him in the left lane, one after the other, really fast, and they're just really placidly going along his own way, right? But it was a lot of fun, and it was also an adventure because it's also always breaking down.
Oh, I was going to say, I think it's telling that the majority of new cars today have these like angry faces. They look like kabuki or samurai warriors.
That's right. Yeah, there's actually one that's got headlights like that, look like eyebrows. I'm sorry, I was talking over you.
These cars of the past that we were talking about, the Spitfire and the Beetle, they had happy faces. It wasn't that they were effeminate; they were just fun. We had a sense of humor. It was a joyful experience, and it's ironic to me. It's indicative to me of the state of our times that you've got this siege mentality in these trucks. It tells you a lot, I think, about the changes that have happened in the car industry over the last 30-ish years.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, my Mary Oldsmobile, that was a tune, I think, that they sold those cars to, tootling along the road in my Mary Oldsmobile. We don't have that kind of an attitude anymore towards anything, do we? Everything's got to be a bit of a battle, especially on the road. And I think it is the general stress that everybody is starting to feel. Talk a little bit about the enshittification of cars. I think that is the word of our time. I think it perfectly describes everything in so many different disciplines.
Yeah, let's see. I'll start by saying this week I'm driving a brand new Land Rover, the Range Rover Sport. And this is a vehicle that starts at around $80,000. First thing you notice when you get in it is this cheesy, tacky looking LCD touchscreen. They all have now.
Yeah.
And, it couldn't be any more low rent looking, in my opinion. And counterpoint to that is Bugatti. I can't. They have this new car they're coming. I think it's called the Tourbillon, and I'm probably mangling the pronunciation of it. But they introduced it recently, and it has all analog chronograph style instrumentation, timeless. That's what they talked about. They said this isn't the car, for now. It's the car forever, because it has that something. They also talk about digital fatigue. This just crap that's everywhere. A good way to understand it is, you can go to a dollar store and pick up for $10 a digital watch that tells time quite accurately. But would you rather have a Rolex? It's much more, a factor. Of course, you'd rather have. The reason that people are fascinated by it is because it's art. It's not just a functional thing. It is also art at the same time. To watch these intricate jeweled mechanisms work, it's special. It's something. When you're paying top dollar, it's one thing when you're, okay, I'm buying $10. I just want a watch that tells me the time. But if you want something special and it's expensive, you better get something special. And that's why I use that word enshittification. Because people are paying a lot of money, $50,000, $60,000 for something that basically isn't really meaningfully any different than a $25,000 entry level car. Other than, I spent a lot of money on it, but what are you getting for all that money? And if you look at it honestly, the reality is not very much. And I think maybe it's time to start rebelling against that and expecting more. I remember just a story when I was a kid. One of my friends' dads had a Jaguar V12 XJ sedan. And we used to just lift the hood of that thing and gape at it. We were so impressed by how beautiful it was. It was like, wow. And that is what you should be getting when you buy a Jag or when you buy a Mercedes-Benz, which was once just a superior machine in every way. If you look at the amount of work and detail that went into those cars once upon a time, it's not the case anymore. They've made a huge mistake by emulating smartphones. Like it's like a lemming-like mania. Like everybody wants to have the latest iPhone, it seems, an iPhone on wheels. Let's make the screen, have a bigger screen. It has more apps on it. It's a degradation. There's just nothing about it that has any permanence, anything that makes you think, when you look back on it 20 years from now, you look at it and go, wow, that's spectacular. Go to a Concours Elegance and look at the cars from that period. Look at a Duesenberg. From the late 1920s. It's jaw-dropping what they did with those things. Yeah. These are the permanent things. I guess Russell Kirk talked about that, the important things.
I agree. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce that name either, but I laughed when I saw that in print from the Bugatti. It looks like Tourbillon, and I thought, well, maybe that's the price.
Because that's what it seems like the only people who can really afford nice things will be the extremely affluent, and the rest of us will have to be content with this cheesy, cheap, disposable garbage that's expensive to boot.
That's right. That's what they're doing with the statism that we have. It concentrates wealth. If you want to know why you're getting all this massive concentration, it's because the government is being used for that. It's a partner in that. It is giving people the advantages if they buy a pass with Trump or whoever it is that's in office. That's what they get in exchange. Yeah, when we talk about instruments, and we've had this discussion before years ago when they were getting so obsessive about charging people who are using their phones while they're driving. And I get it. I think that is a distraction. And yet, at the time, I was renting some cars that had these big display panels, the LCD things, and I'm driving down the road and I'm trying to drive and then not only looking at a touch panel, but I got to reach over to get to it. And I'm trying to do something that I see is there. I've got to slide something or I've got to, try to select something there. And the road is bumping my hand as I'm trying to do that. And I thought, what in the world? Why would anybody want something like this? I understand why the car companies want it. And it is an enshittification because they can very cheaply, as you point out in your article, they can very cheaply put these LCDs in. And think about all of the engineering that goes into a high quality analog control, whether you're talking about a push button or a dial or something that's going to last for years, with all the abuse and use that it's going to get over the years. And they've got to test these things. They've got to make them last. The touch panels are cheap. They're replaceable. Doesn't really matter.
Right. Well, and they're expensive to replace.
Yeah.
The thing about
is cheap.
Strikes me, they'll say you don't need to use your phone while you're driving. And maybe that's true, absent an emergency, like you have to call 911. But you kind of do have to be able to adjust the climate control, don't you?
Yeah.
Like if you want to turn up the fan or turn down the heat, these are basic essential functions. And then they give you secondary things which are sold as features like GPS. What good is a GPS if you're not allowed to punch in the street address while you're driving?
That's right.
If you can't use the thing unless you stop. I mean, it's exasperating. They give you these features, but you're only allowed to use them under certain circumstances.
Well,
and it gets even worse. I don't know whether you caught.
I remember when we were talking about this years ago with Tesla, they wouldn't let you adjust the air vent direction, right? Without using that touchscreen pad. I thought, how ridiculous is that? I mean, how expensive and difficult is it for them to put a tab on a grill that is going to move inside a slot and be able to adjust the air up or down, left or right? But you got to go through the touch panel to do that. It's insane.
Yes. Yeah,
and
needless
of course,
complexity.
Yeah, of course, the doors as well are under software control as well. That's a real issue.
Everything. They're speaking of Teslas, they're emulating the Range Rover that I've got. It's got the flush-mounted door pulls. So instead of being just simple, it opens and you get in and click. Now you have to wait for the thing to kind of go. I mean, it looks good in a commercial. It kind of like goes ooh, and that's it. But when you're in a hurry, you just want to grab the handle and get in the car.
Yeah.
But now you have to wait there for that little moment for it to do that. And what happens when the mechanism freezes up and doesn't work anymore?
Yeah.
I mean, good luck trying to get in the car.
I've got a friend who's got a Tesla, and he got stuck in his car because it wouldn't open up. He said, fortunately, I had my phone with me, and I could call Tesla support, but it still took a long time for me to get the doors open. They had to basically log into his car and open it up. We had, there was just an article I saw talking about, and I laughed when I saw it because it said, well, new cars are spontaneously catching on fire. And it's like, which new cars would those be? Would that be the electric cars with the lithium batteries that you're talking about? That's not happening with the gasoline and diesel cars that are out there. Not spontaneously catching on fire while they're sitting still and turned off. But we see that with all kinds of EVs. We see it with big buses. We see it with EV bikes burning down a lot of apartment buildings in New York because people left them in the lobby and they spontaneously combusted.
This dangerous stupidity is rationalized and tolerated to a degree that would never have flown, when we were young. I mean, if you had a car, imagine try to get yourself in the mindset of, say, 1975, and some manufacturer had sold a car that locked you in it. And the greatest, I think, recall that ever happened was about the Ford Pinto, because a literal handful of them, we're talking about, I think it was the figures are somewhere between 25 and 80 or something like that. Pintos actually caught fire as a result of being violently rear-ended in accidents. Now, in context, Ford sold millions of those things. It was a very high volume vehicle. So, the chances of your individual Pinto catching fire were extraordinarily small. A specific set of circumstances had to happen in order for that to happen. Well, anyway, there was a massive, massive recall, massive class action lawsuit, because it was considered awful of Ford to have not figured out how to, or been willing to design the car in such a way that would have been reduced even further. But it's okay somehow to have these lithium batteries.
Yeah.
You don't have to do anything. You just have to have it, and it'll catch fire.
That's
like
right.
You can't do anything to avoid the fire. If it's your number that comes up, it's your number that comes up. You get burned to death, your house gets burned to death, or burned to the ground.
And these are very expensive. Yeah. When Karen had a Pinto, and it was as bare bones as a car I've ever seen. I mean, it had like this rubber mat, which was not uncommon, a few decades ago anyway, but 50 years ago, let's say. But at one point in time, even carpet was something that was an upgrade in a lot of cars. But yeah, it was really stripped down. And I remember it had, it wasn't a hatchback, it had a trunk that was about a foot to 2 feet long. And even though it was very short, when you would slam the thing shut, it would just sit there and vibrate. Yeah. I mean, we've got sturdier pans for cooking in the kitchen than that trunk was.
We laugh at it, but Lee Iacocca, who was responsible for the Pinto, he dictated the parameters, which were that it would weigh 2,000 pounds and sell for $2,000.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it would be a fine thing if Americans could buy a $2,000 car or a $10,000 car.
That's right. It's
a
not allowed.
car.
It's not allowed. Yeah.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah.
One of the reasons that working and middle income people actually had some capital and some means back in the day was because they weren't tied to 6 years of car payments for $800 a month. You could buy a Pinto, and okay, granted, it didn't have a touchscreen and it didn't have climate control, air conditioning, and heated seats, but you paid the thing off in 3 years.
That's
and
right.
The payments were very manageable because it was an inexpensive car. We're denied that now, and I think it's outrageous. Why shouldn't people be free to buy an inexpensive car if that's what they want?
That's right. Yeah. And that was exactly what she needed at the time. She was a student, so that's exactly what she needed to have. And now that path has been cut off for people. Why? Because it's been prohibited by the federal government for the most part, for reasons that really have now been shown to be purely hypothetical and hypocritical. We talk about climate issues and all the rest of this stuff. It all began with emission controls, and it goes to all the quote unquote safety equipment. It's we've talked about this before, and it doesn't seem to be improving at all, does it? You do have an article about corn and the feces pile or whatever. Tell us a little bit about that. You found something good?
I did find something good. Who knows whether anything will come of it, but there are 2 Republicans who have put forward a bill that would rescind, using federal leverage in a good way for once, to get rid of mandatory helmet laws. I ride motorcycles and I despise helmet laws because I'm not a child. I can make my own decisions. I'm capable of evaluating the risk. Granted, there's a risk. Well, so what? There's a risk with almost anything in this life. And the arbitrariness of it has always infuriated me. I can legally jump on my bike wearing shorts, flip-flops, and a t-shirt as long as I'm wearing a helmet. And they give you this.
That reminds me of the drills that we had in elementary school during the Cuban Missile Crisis. We got a nuclear bomb that's coming in, but to be safe, kids, duck and cover and stick your head in the metal desk. We always just laugh about that and say, well, was that so they could identify us by the dental records later on?
The arbitrariness of it's just so preposterous. I've long maintained that, if a motorcycle were a new technology, they would prohibit you from riding it in the first place. Since they can't do that, this is punitive. I can tell you that one of the reasons that people like to ride is because you want to feel the wind in your hair. And if you have a passenger behind you, you can lean back and talk to your passenger. When you have a helmet on, that experience is all muted, muffled, and suffocating. And that I really do believe that they are trying to punish people. If you were going to be sensible about it, well, why don't they mandate that if you're going to ride a motorcycle, you have to wear armored leathers, armored gloves, and boots too? They don't do that. Just the helmet. Why is that? And they'll give you this prattle about, the cost of society. You're going to wreck, and then you're going to cause. Well, first of all, I didn't wreck, so I haven't cost anybody anything. That's point 1. Point 2, and the only reason that I could hypothetically impose costs on society is because of government. How about I get held responsible for what I do? Like if I do something irresponsible, if I put a nail gun to my head and push the trigger, that's on me. If I ride, without a helmet, I choose to do that, and I wreck. Well, that's my problem. It's not your problem. You have no agency over me. And the thing of it is, if you accept this doctrine that, well, because you are concerned about the costs I might impose on society, well, I can turn that around. There's so many things that other people do. I see all these overweight people. What about all the costs to society all these overweight people are imposing? Maybe there should be a fat tax. Maybe we should sick cops on anybody who's got a gut. We watch that guy. He went to McDonald's. Get him. Right?
Yeah, they could park outside of McDonald's like they park outside of bars, right?
Yeah.
Did you have a Big Mac? I'm afraid we're going to have to take you in. Yeah.
It's this busybody society. We've gone so far down the road of busybodyism. I'm old enough to remember when Americans didn't like busybodies, and people had this attitude of, you don't have to like what that person is doing. Leave him alone. He's not hurting you. Let him do his thing. And there was a selfish aspect to it because it was understood that if you started being a busybody, well, they're going to be a busybody too. And before you know it, we're all nattering at each other.
That's right.
And trying to get the government to impose our particular weird view of things on other people. And that's a hellscape. Who wants to live like that?
I absolutely agree. Yeah, we don't ever hear anybody say, hey, it's a free country anymore. We don't ever hear that. Used to hear that all the time. Or, hey, don't make a federal case out of it. Now we got to make a federal case out of everything, and that's why it's not a free country. Eric, it's so good talking to you. It's a breath of fresh air.
Likewise, David.
Wonderful. EricPeters.com. Thank you so much, Eric. Appreciate it.
Thank you, David.
Have a good day. The Common Man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.